The Chicago skyline glittered against the night sky, a testament to human achievement and ambition. From the top floor of the Bradson Tower, William Bradson stared out at the city he'd conquered. At 45, he had everything money could buy, except a solution for his 5-year-old twins, Emma and Ethan, who had yet to speak a single word or take a single step on their own. William turned away from the window, his reflection showing a man with sandy blonde hair beginning to gray at the temples, sharp blue eyes, and a perpetual furrow between his brows that hadn't been there before the twins were born. The doctors had no answers. The specialists had theories but no solutions. The therapists made promises they couldn't keep. Mr. Bradson? His assistant Margaret appeared at the door. The new nanny is here for her interview. William sighed. This would be the 7th nanny in 8 months. Nobody stayed. Nobody knew how to connect with his children. Send her in, he said, not bothering to hide his weariness. When Elizabeth Johnson walked into his office, William was struck by her quiet confidence. Unlike the previous applicants who had been intimidated by his wealth or overly eager to impress him, Elizabeth carried herself with dignity. Her dark skin contrasted with the crisp white blouse she wore, and her natural hair was styled in neat braids. Mr. Bradson, she said, extending her hand. Her voice was warm like honey over gravel. I'm Elizabeth Johnson. Her handshake was firm. William gestured to the chair across from his desk. You understand this position is challenging, he began, cutting straight to the point. My twins have special needs. They don't speak. They don't walk. They've seen every specialist in the country. Elizabeth nodded, her expression revealing nothing. I've read their files, she said simply. I'd like to meet them. William raised an eyebrow. Most candidates wanted to know about salary, benefits, living arrangements in the mansion, everything but the children themselves. You don't want to discuss the position first? Hours, compensation, expectations? Elizabeth smiled slightly. I believe in knowing who I'm working with before discussing terms. Children aren't terms on a contract, Mr. Bradson. Something about her directness caught him off guard. He found himself leading her up to the nursery suite, a space larger than most people's entire homes, filled with every toy, therapy equipment, and learning device money could buy. Emma and Ethan sat in their custom wheelchairs by the window, identical with their father's blue eyes and blonde hair. They didn't turn when the door opened. They rarely reacted to anything. Emma, Ethan, William said, his voice automatically softening. This is Miss Johnson. The twins remained still, gazing out the window at the clouds. William began his usual explanation about their condition, the routines they followed, the therapies they'd tried. Elizabeth listened politely but kept her eyes on the children. Then, without warning, she walked over and crouched in front of them, entering their line of sight. Hello, Emma. Hello, Ethan, she said, not raising her voice or using the sing-song tone many adults adopted with children. My name is Elizabeth. I think those clouds you're watching look like ice cream scoops. Don't you think? For the first time since entering the room, William saw a tiny flicker in Emma's eyes, the slightest shift in attention. It was so subtle he might have imagined it. Elizabeth noticed it too. She didn't react dramatically or point it out. She just continued. I love ice cream. Chocolate is my favorite. I wonder what flavors you like? She waited, as if they might actually answer her. The silence stretched, but Elizabeth seemed unbothered by it. I'm going to be spending time with you both if that's okay. I think we might have fun together. William watched, fascinated. Her approach was different. She spoke to them as if they could understand everything, as if their lack of response was a choice rather than a limitation. After a few more minutes, Elizabeth stood and turned to him. They're beautiful children, Mr. Bradson. Smart too. I can see it in their eyes. William felt a lump in his throat. How long had it been since someone had seen past his children's disabilities to who they really were? The position is yours if you want it, he said impulsively. Elizabeth shook her head. I appreciate that, but I think we should discuss the details first. And I'd like a trial period for all of us. 2 weeks. If at the end of that time you're not satisfied, or if I feel I can't help Emma and Ethan, We part ways, no hard feelings. Her practicality impressed him. They returned to his office and hammered out the terms. Elizabeth would live in the mansion's staff quarters, have every weekend off, and receive a salary that made her eyes widen slightly, the only indication she gave that the figure surprised her. "One more thing," William said as they concluded. "I have rules. The children keep a strict schedule. Their diet, their therapy sessions, their educational activities, everything is carefully planned by experts. I expect that schedule to be followed precisely." Elizabeth nodded, but there was something in her expression, not defiance exactly, but a certain reserve. "I understand the importance of structure, Mr. Bradson, but children also need room to breathe and discover themselves." William frowned. "My children aren't like other children." "No," Elizabeth agreed. "They're uniquely themselves, just like all children are." William found himself at a loss for words. Elizabeth seemed to sense the conversation had reached its natural conclusion. She stood and extended her hand again. "I'll start tomorrow morning at 7, if that works for you." As he watched her walk out, William had the strange feeling that something fundamental had just changed in his carefully controlled world. Elizabeth arrived exactly at 7 the next morning, dressed in comfortable clothes suitable for childcare, but still professional. She found William in the breakfast room, laptop open, already deep into his workday. The twins were in their wheelchairs beside him, their breakfast mostly untouched. "Good morning," Elizabeth greeted them all. The twins, as expected, didn't respond, but William nodded in acknowledgement. "Their schedule is on the tablet," he said, gesturing to a device on the table. "Morning therapy starts at 9 with Dr. Larson." Elizabeth reviewed the schedule as she familiarized herself with the twins' breakfast routine. It was incredibly rigid, each bite carefully planned for maximum nutritional benefit, each activity timed to the minute. "Do they always eat in silence?" she asked. William looked up from his laptop. "They don't respond to conversation." "But they can hear," Elizabeth said, not as a question but a statement. "Yes," William confirmed. "Their hearing is perfect. They just don't engage." Elizabeth pulled up a chair between Emma and Ethan. "Then I think they might enjoy some company while they eat. I know I always do." She began to talk as she helped feed them, describing the day ahead, commenting on the weather, telling them about herself, her favorite color, yellow, her love of gardening, how she'd grown up with 4 brothers. William tried to focus on his work, but he found himself listening to her gentle monologue. There was something soothing about her voice, the way it filled the silent space without demanding anything in return. As the days passed, Elizabeth maintained this practice of constant, gentle communication with the twins. She spoke to them during meals, baths, therapy sessions, and playtime. She read to them, sang to them, and described the world outside their window in vivid detail. She also began making small adjustments to their rigid schedule, nothing that violated William's rules, but little pockets of what she called discovery time, where the twins could explore toys or books according to their own interests, rather than following a prescribed activity. William noticed but said nothing. After the first week, though, he began finding reasons to observe Elizabeth with his children. He told himself it was to ensure she was following protocol, but in truth, he was fascinated by her approach. One afternoon, as he worked in his home office, he heard music floating down the hall. Not the classical compositions the therapist had recommended, but something livelier, with a distinct rhythm. Curious, he followed the sound to the nursery. The sight that greeted him stopped him in his tracks. Elizabeth had moved the furniture to create an open space in the middle of the room. She had taken Emma out of her wheelchair and was holding her, gently swaying to the music. Emma's small body was stiff at first, but as Elizabeth continued to move, the child's muscles began to relax. "Feel the beat, Emma," Elizabeth was saying. "That's your heartbeat, and mine, and the rhythm of the whole world moving together." She turned and saw William standing in the doorway. "I hope you don't mind," she said, not stopping her gentle dance. "We're having music appreciation time." William should have objected. This wasn't on the schedule, but the sight of Emma's body gradually softening in Elizabeth's arms kept him silent. Ethan had his turn already, Elizabeth explained, nodding toward the boy who sat in his wheelchair, watching them with an intensity William hadn't seen before. He liked the drums the best. William stepped into the room. The therapists tried music therapy for months. They didn't respond. Elizabeth smiled. Maybe they just didn't like the music. She continued her dance with Emma, adding a gentle spin that made the little girl's hair float out around her face. For a moment, just a fleeting second, William thought he saw Emma's lips twitch upward. "Would you like to try?" Elizabeth asked him. William stiffened. "I don't dance." "Everyone dances," Elizabeth said. "Some of us just forget how." She carefully transferred Emma back to her wheelchair and went to Ethan. "Maybe Ethan would dance with his father while I give Emma a turn with the maracas." Before William could object, Elizabeth had placed the small instrument in Emma's hand, gently wrapping the child's fingers around it and helping her shake it to the rhythm. William stood awkwardly beside Ethan's wheelchair. The boy looked up at him, those blue eyes, so like his own, revealing nothing of his thoughts. "I don't think this is a good idea," William began, but Elizabeth was already demonstrating. "Just a gentle rock, see? You can even stay in the wheelchair for now, Ethan. Feel how the music wants to move you." William felt foolish, but under Elizabeth's encouraging gaze, he found himself tentatively placing his hands on the wheelchair handles and swaying it slightly to the rhythm. "That's it," Elizabeth said warmly. "Now you're dancing together." The moment was small, but for William it felt enormous. When was the last time he had played with his children? Really played. Not just supervised an educational activity or observed a therapy session. After that day, William found more and more reasons to be present during what he now thought of as Elizabeth time. He watched as she introduced new elements to the twins' routine, different textures for them to touch, new scents, varied foods. She brought in plants from the garden for them to feel and smell. She took them outside on nice days, describing the clouds, the birds, the changing colors of the trees. 1 month into Elizabeth's employment, William came home early from work to find her sitting on the nursery floor with both twins out of their wheelchairs, supported by cushions in a semicircle around her. She was reading them, "Where the Wild Things Are," complete with dramatic voices for each character. He watched from the doorway, not wanting to interrupt. As Elizabeth reached the part where Max tames the wild things by staring into their yellow eyes, she suddenly looked up and caught William's gaze. "Mr. Bradson, join us. We're just getting to the wild rumpus." William hesitated, then surprised himself by sitting down on the floor opposite Elizabeth, completing the circle with his children between them. "I used to read this to my brothers," Elizabeth said, turning the page to show the illustrations of monsters dancing wildly in the forest. "We'd have our own wild rumpus afterward until our mother threatened to send us all to bed without supper." She smiled at the memory. William found himself saying, "My mother read this to me too." Elizabeth's eyes lit up. "Did you have a wild rumpus?" William shook his head. "No, I was an only child, very well behaved." "Well," Elizabeth said with a mischievous glint in her eye, "it's never too late for your first wild rumpus." She closed the book and, to William's astonishment, began to make a monstrous face and wave her arms in a silly dance. "This is how the wild things dance." William felt the familiar discomfort of someone used to boardroom decorum being asked to be silly. But then he looked at Emma and Ethan, and for the first time, he saw something like curiosity in their expressions as they watched Elizabeth's antics. Before he could stop himself, William let out a low, playful growl and made a face of his own. Elizabeth's delighted laugh encouraged him, and soon he was dancing around the nursery with her, making monster noises and silly faces while the twins watched from their cushioned seats on the floor. In the middle of their wild rumpus, William heard a sound that stopped him cold. Cold. It was small, barely audible, but unmistakably a giggle, coming from Emma. He whirled around to stare at his daughter. Did she? Elizabeth was already kneeling beside Emma, her own eyes wide with excitement. You liked that, didn't you, Emma? You thought Daddy was a funny monster. William knelt down too, his heart pounding. Emma? Sweetheart? For a breathtaking moment, father and daughter locked eyes. Then Emma's mouth opened, and she made the sound again, a tiny giggle that was the most beautiful thing William had ever heard. She laughed, he whispered, tears springing to his eyes. My God, she actually laughed. Elizabeth was beaming. Of course she did. Her daddy is hilarious. She turned to Ethan. What about you, young man? Did you think Daddy was funny too? Ethan didn't laugh, but his eyes tracked his father's movements with new awareness. That night, after the twins were asleep, William invited Elizabeth to join him for a cup of coffee in the kitchen. Something he'd never done with staff before. How did you know? He asked her. How did you know Emma could laugh? That she would respond to play? Elizabeth stirred her coffee thoughtfully. I didn't know for sure, but I believed it was possible. Children are born wanting to connect, Mr. Bradson. Sometimes they just need to find their own way of doing it. Call me William, please, he said, suddenly uncomfortable with the formality. And thank you for believing in my children when everyone else, including me, had given up hope. Elizabeth shook her head. You never gave up hope. If you had, you wouldn't have hired 7 nannies in 8 months. The truth of her words hit him like a physical force. He had kept searching, kept trying, because somewhere deep inside, he had never accepted that his children were unreachable. From that day forward, play became a regular part of the twins' routine. Elizabeth incorporated games into their therapy exercises. She created sensory experiences that stimulated their minds and bodies. And William, to his own surprise, became an eager participant. The transformation wasn't immediate or miraculous. There were still challenging days when the twins seemed to retreat into themselves. But there were also breakthroughs. Ethan reaching for a toy for the first time instead of having it placed in his hand. Emma making eye contact during a story. Both children showing preferences for certain foods, toys, and activities. 3 months after Elizabeth's arrival, she burst into William's office, her face alight with excitement. Come quickly, she said, not bothering with explanations. William followed her to the nursery, where Ethan was sitting on the floor with blocks spread around him. As they watched from the doorway, Ethan deliberately reached out, picked up a red block, and placed it on top of a blue one. He's building, Elizabeth whispered. On his own. I didn't help him. William felt his chest constrict. Such a simple action, a child stacking blocks, but for Ethan, it represented a monumental achievement. It meant he was connecting with the world, making choices, creating. Where's Emma? William asked, noticing his daughter wasn't in the room. Elizabeth's smile grew even wider. That's the other surprise. Follow me. She led him to the physical therapy room, where Emma was seated in a specially designed walker. The therapist, Dr. Larson, stood nearby, her professional demeanor barely containing her excitement. We've been practicing, Dr. Larson explained. Elizabeth noticed Emma showing interest in standing whenever we played certain music. We've been building on that. Elizabeth went to the sound system and pressed play. The room filled with the cheerful rhythm of Walking on Sunshine. She approached Emma and crouched in front of her. Ready to show Daddy what you've been working on, Sunshine Girl? Emma's eyes found her father, and William could have sworn he saw determination in them. You can do it, Emma, he encouraged, kneeling down to her eye level. Daddy's right here. With Elizabeth on one side and Dr. Pyth Larson on the other, Emma gripped the handles of her walker. Her small face scrunched in concentration. Then, with a deliberate movement that spoke of weeks of practice, she pushed herself up to a standing position. William couldn't breathe. His daughter was standing, on her own 2 feet. That's it, Emma, Elizabeth encouraged. Now, 1 foot forward, just like we practiced. Emma's right foot moved forward an inch, then her left. The walker rolled slightly, supporting her weight as she took her very first independent steps. William didn't realize he was crying until he felt the wetness on his cheeks. He opened his arms as Emma slowly made her way toward him, 1 tiny step at a time. When she reached him, he gathered her into a gentle embrace. You did it, sweetheart. You walked. You wonderful, amazing girl, you walked. Over Emma's shoulder, his eyes met Elizabeth's, and the gratitude he felt was too enormous for words. That night, after the children were asleep, William found Elizabeth in the garden, sitting on a bench beneath the stars. "May I join you?" he asked. She nodded, making space beside her. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the Chicago skyline twinkling in the distance. "I've been thinking about their future," William finally said. "6 months ago I was planning for a lifetime of dependency. Now?" He shook his head in wonder. "Now I'm wondering if Emma might dance at her wedding someday, if Ethan might build skyscrapers instead of just block towers." Elizabeth smiled. "They've always had futures, William. They're just showing you what those futures might look like now." "Because of you," he said softly. Elizabeth shook her head. "Because of themselves. All I did was see them, really see them, for who they are, not for what they couldn't do." William thought about that. "I didn't see them," he admitted. "I saw their diagnoses, their limitations. I saw problems to be solved." "You were trying to be a good father," Elizabeth said gently. "You wanted the best for them. The best specialists, the best therapies, the best educational tools," William agreed. "But not the best of myself. I didn't give them that until you showed me how." They fell silent again, watching the stars. "They're going to talk someday," Elizabeth said confidently. "They're finding their voices in other ways right now, but the words will come." William believed her. After everything they'd witnessed in the past 3 months, how could he not? The following weeks brought more progress. Ethan became more engaged with his surroundings, reaching for toys, responding to his name, even making deliberate sounds that, while not words, were clearly attempts at communication. Emma continued her walking practice and began to show interest in drawing, making bold, colorful marks on paper that Elizabeth proudly displayed around the nursery. Then came the morning that changed everything. William was working from home, reviewing contracts in his office, when he heard a commotion from the direction of the nursery. He hurried down the hall, alarmed, only to find Elizabeth standing in the doorway, one hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. His heart stopped. "What's wrong? Are the children?" But Elizabeth was smiling through her tears. She put a finger to her lips and gestured for him to look inside the room. The twins were sitting on the floor together, surrounded by picture books. As William watched, Ethan picked up a book about animals and pointed to a picture of an elephant. And then, in a small but clear voice, he said, "Elephant." William's knees nearly buckled. His son had spoken. His son, who hadn't uttered a single word in 5 years, had just named an animal in a book. Before he could react, Emma reached over, turned the page and pointed to another picture. "Dog," she said distinctly. 2 words, 2 voices. After years of silence, William must have made a sound, because both children looked up. When they saw their father, something miraculous happened. They both smiled, truly smiled, their eyes lighting up with recognition and joy. "Daddy," Emma said, reaching out her arms to him. William crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to his knees beside his children. "Yes," he choked out through his tears. "Daddy's here. Daddy's right here." He gathered them both into his arms, these precious children who had found their way back to the world, or perhaps had found a world finally ready to meet them where they were. Over their heads, his eyes met Elizabeth's. She was still crying, but her face shone with a joy that matched his own. No words were needed between them. They both knew what this moment meant. It wasn't just about words spoken after years of silence. It was about connection. The connection between father and children, between caregiver and charges, between human beings who had learned to see and hear each other in ways that went far beyond speech. Later that evening, after the twins had been put to bed, with real good nights, spoken aloud for the first time, William found Elizabeth in the kitchen, making herself a cup of tea. "I don't know how to thank you," he said simply. Elizabeth smiled. "You don't need to thank me. Seeing them blossom is all the thanks I need." "You changed their lives," William insisted, "and mine." "No," Elizabeth shook her head. "They changed their own lives when they were ready. And you, she added with a warm look, you changed your life when you decided to dance with your children instead of just watching from the doorway. William considered her words. I've been standing in doorways my whole life, he realized aloud, observing, analyzing, controlling, but never really participating. He looked at Elizabeth with new understanding, until you showed me how to step into the room. It's never too late to join the dance, Elizabeth said softly. In that moment, William Bradson, billionaire, businessman, father, felt a shift inside himself, as profound as the changes he'd witnessed in his children. He had spent his life accumulating wealth and power, believing they would protect him from the vulnerabilities of real connection. But his children had been locked in silence, and he had been locked in his own kind of isolation, until Elizabeth Johnson had unlocked them all. Would you consider staying? He asked suddenly. Not just as the twins' nanny, but as their, I don't know, their guide? Their teacher? Whatever title fits what you've been to them, what you've been to all of us. Elizabeth's eyes widened slightly. Are you offering me a permanent position? I'm offering you whatever you want, William said honestly. A raise, a different role, flexibility, ability to pursue your own interests while continuing to work with Emma and Ethan. They need you. We need you. The simple truth of those words hung in the air between them. Elizabeth was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I'd like to stay, on one condition. Name it, William replied without hesitation. That we continue to see the twins for who they are, not who we think they should be. That we let them show us the way forward instead of forcing them onto a path we've chosen. William nodded, understanding completely. I think I can promise that. They've already shown me more than I ever expected to see. As they sealed their agreement with a handshake that felt both professional and deeply personal, William thought about the journey ahead. Emma and Ethan would continue to have challenges. There would be setbacks alongside the victories, hard days mixed with the joyful ones. But they would face it all together. Father, children, and the remarkable woman who had taught them all to speak in ways that went beyond words. Elizabeth had come into their lives when hope was fading, and she had shown them that sometimes the greatest miracles happen not in dramatic moments, but in small, everyday acts of seeing, believing, and connecting. And that, William now understood, was the most powerful language of all.